Hey everybody, this is Daniel Oliver and I'm online with my friend and entrepreneur extraordinaire, Yusef Wateef. And he is an American expat like myself. However, he's currently located in Brazil. Which city, Yusef?
I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil right now.
Okay, that's right. He is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, before we start, one thing that I want all of you to do is have a look right now at Yusuf's page, which I'm about to show you. And this is a great resource for all types of information about living abroad, about becoming financially independent, getting in shape. I've learned a lot. I've been inspired quite a bit. So I encourage you all to visit this page, to like and subscribe, and you can get information from there, as well as from Yusuf's name tag at the bottom of his screen about how to join his Patreon project, which again can make a lot of differences in your life. Okay,
Well,
now Yusuf, what we're going to talk about, what we're going to talk about today is whether or not to believe the hype about Brazil and, you know, the sometimes spectacular violence that we see, especially in movies and television shows, and more importantly, whether or not that exists for the African population of Brazil. But I want to do a little warm-up thing first, if you're ready, okay? You probably know, all right, you've probably noticed that whenever you talk about going somewhere and you're back home in the US, African Americans that you know are always going to ask, you know, are there any Black people there, right? Have you ever gotten that question?
Well, about Brazil, here's something most people don't know. Ready? Brazil is a Black country. Like,
okay.
Brazilians are Black people. But here's the analogy I'll give you, right? I'm Black and you're Black. Now, some of us might say African American, some might say Black American, blah, blah, blah. For the purposes of this, I'm going to ask you a very important question. It's not a trick question. Could you ever depend on the media to accurately portray you in your own birth country of the United States, well or without bias?
Well, I don't think so.
Okay.
First thing that comes to my mind. Okay, go ahead.
Because here's why it's not a trick question. If we know that the media in our own country won't portray us accurately and honestly, why could we trust them to portray Black people any place else in the world who can't speak our language and defend their own positions?
I mean, that's a very good point. I remember when I was living in Australia, one time I was with some friends, and actually it was kind of like this African diaspora group of friends that particular day. There were some Omanis, a couple of guys from Eritrea, and even from Kenya. We flipped on the TV, and the movie that was playing was Menace to Society. Now I'm sitting there feeling like while I'm watching the screen, all eyes are on me, you know, thinking, is he like that? And I was wondering, is that what they're thinking? Like, is that what they think I was doing before I hopped on a plane and came over here? You know what I mean? And so I felt that in no way did that really represent my reality. I think it does represent the reality of an extremely tiny group of people. But like you said, they may be getting a sort of overblown amount of representation in the various media. So I definitely have to say that I don't agree that I should accept blindly what people represent about Africans and other countries as well. Now, you said Brazil is a Black country. Are you speaking to the percentage of Brazilians who have African ancestry, I guess? Is that what you mean when you make that statement?
I mean, yes. I mean, most Brazilians are Black. One of the things we learned very quickly is that, you know, Brazil is one of those countries that ended slavery very late. And one of the things they ended up doing, realizing that the situation they had on hand, they had to import Europeans because there were so many Black people here. Remember, more slaves came to Brazil than the United States.
Yeah, what I heard about Brazil and the issue of slavery was that they had a policy of work them to death because there's a new boat coming. So they didn't have this idea of trying to let's say, relatively treat them better so they would live longer. Because it's like, hey, why worry? Why spend 1 cent? There's another boat. And that's why they got such a large population. Okay, so now we know that there are definitely, there's an Afro-Brazilian population. Okay, I've seen movie series like Elite. I think almost everyone has seen Children of City of God, right?
Mhm.
I think almost everyone has seen that movie City of God. And it's really interesting. When I saw City of God, I actually downloaded it, and there was this documentary that was kind of tagged onto the end, and it was called something like Diary of a Personal Drug War. And in that documentary, they actually showed how the police deal with, and it was basically like the war on drugs in America, right? Something that disproportionately affected the Afro community of the country, and where the police were definitely not heroes, right? And based on that, which it was a pretty well sourced documentary, and also just articles that I've read here and there. There's a blog that I'm going to look up really quick and show you. I've been under the impression that the issue of police violence against the Afro population in Brazil is as bad or worse than in the United States. And basically, when I talked to you, you were saying that no, it's not like that. So I just want to get your thoughts in general. What is the relationship with Afro-Brazilians and the police? Let's just start there.
Well, let me do two things. One, I want to lay a disclaimer out there. I do not feel comfortable representing the struggles of Black Brazilians until I am dead fluent in the language so that I can explain that position in Portuguese. I don't want to allow my arrogance to tell me that I can accurately portray their struggle if I can't even do it in their native language. I can only tell you what my observations have been as someone who is a permanent resident of Brazil who is learning Brazilian culture. Okay?
Okay, fair enough.
Two, I want to say that their struggle is different, very different. The relationship between law enforcement and Brazilians is as ruthless as it is in the United States. The difference is I don't necessarily believe that they pretend it's not. You don't have the level of stratification in the United States that you do in Brazil. Let me do this real quick. I'm going to show you something, and if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to click my share screen option right there. You see that?
Okay.
That's the City of God. If anybody wants to go online, get City of God, and also get City of God 10 years later. Yeah, get City of God and get City of God 10 years later. It's a follow-up piece. Okay? Now, of course, these don't accurately represent all the struggles of Black people, because one of the things that we find is that not all Black people live in the favela, but in Brazil, a lot of them do. And for the record, favela does not equal housing project. A favela is one step below. We don't have favelas in the United States. They're like a shanty. We do not have anything equivalent. Don't believe the whole, it's just like a ghetto in America. No, it's not. The relationship here with law enforcement does have free and open reign to kill and maim. The Black people that these things happen to live in unincorporated areas. But as far as violence, I can tell you that you and I living in Brazil, and this is where we ended up having our first real chat about this, we're safer in Brazil than we would ever be in the United States.
Now, how is that? Because in the United States, the way that, this kind of police violence works, and what I'm referring to is just a person could be in Walmart, a person could be in a park, a person could be calling to police to their house, a person could get pulled over for something mundane and end up getting shot.
Yes.
How and what I've noticed is that while it does affect communities like Black communities like geographically more, it seems like it really has been happening just about anywhere, any part of town, so to speak. What would make a black person in Brazil safer in one context from another? Are you referring it because African Americans who migrate to Brazil wouldn't live in favelas? Or do you think that somehow they would differentiate based on where we're from? I mean, what do you mean by that?
Here's the thing. Like we said, in the United States, you could be going into a supermarket to buy oranges. You could be taking your children to school. You could be a child in school. You could be walking home from a supermarket in the evening and simply be shot by a white person randomly. And I say that regardless of whether or not they're an average citizen or a police officer. This is a truth.
That's true.
In Brazil, one of the things that classism and capitalism has done is created a situation where there is a Faustian blend of capitalism and classism that if you are in a certain area, in a certain way, dressed a certain way, the police tend to avoid you. I don't live in a place where police just rough you up. I got off the bus once, not far from my house, which is not far from downtown, and they had 4 boys lined up against the wall with guns drawn. By the way, police here, the first thing to do is point the guns at you, and then they give you the instructions. Under no circumstance do the police interact with you without all their rifles pointed at you. That's the first thing they do. But those boys would be considered black anywhere in the world, but they were obviously poor. They were wearing flip-flop shoes, shorts, tank tops. Their hairstyles were indicative of poverty. And the first assumption is they must have been doing something wrong somewhere, or the classic line, you look like someone we're looking for. I walk past wearing what I would, simple, what do I wear? I wear a polo shirt to deal with my clients, jeans, and white Shoto Adidas. But that immediately tells them I'm not of that taste, let's say. And it took me a while to figure that out. It took me a while for someone to tell me that the reason I can never blend in as being a local or a Brazilian is I simply don't walk with any fear. I walk and engage. I will look at a police officer and say, good afternoon. It immediately tells them, for some strange reason, clearly I must have enough education or resource to actually make a complaint if something did go awry, or that I'm a foreigner, that I'm an American. I wish I could tell you that.
Okay. And what I'm wondering is when you mention class and how these guys were dressed like they were poor, you were dressed in your polo shirt, it's a little bit more subtle than just your skin color. And it could be, your economic level as well, meaning, well, you live here. And if you're in a neighborhood where we don't really get down like that, and you look like you belong in that neighborhood, go ahead. We don't pull out our guns on people in this neighborhood. We pull out our guns in the favela. Or we put all our guns on people who are from the favela wherever we see them. Is it something a little bit, there's kind of half, whereas what you're saying in America is, and this is what I feel, there's no class element. You could be Henry Louis Gates Jr. and you forgot your keys, so you're knocking on your own door in Harvard, and they're gonna arrest you even when you pull out your ID and say, look, this is my house, here's my ID, my address, is on the house. So I think in America, class don't matter. It's like if you're black, you're black. Whereas in Brazil, you get that secondary consideration, so to speak.
And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. You nailed it. Because for people who don't know, he wasn't making that up. That Henry Louis Gates, respected educator with television shows, lost the keys to his house and was arrested like a common street criminal at his place of residence. Which is,
yeah.
And here's the thing, when you look at it, you realize they knew who he was, but they wanted to go through with the humiliation and the degrading treatment just so they could say they did it. And that's the thing, isn't it there? That's the thing.
Well, and what I think is that in America, it seems as though one of the issues around they want to enforce the class, the race hierarchy, regardless of class. And I'm putting you can see this photo right here. You see Henry Louis Gates outside of his house, and he's wearing a polo shirt, right? Now,
he looks exactly the way I do.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that they like to do in the United States is they want to basically reinforce the racial hierarchy, meaning there's this so-called joke, what do you call a black doctor? And the answer is nigger, meaning it doesn't matter who you are, you're black and you have to be put in your place. We're above you. And there was something where I think a president like, it could have been LBJ, it could have been the guy right before FDR. One of them said that, sorry, what was the name? Okay, well, one of them basically said something like, the lowest, you can get a white man to vote for you as long as the lowest one of them feels that he's above the Negro. Meaning the poorest, least educated person knows that he can call a doctor, a PhD, a lawyer, an astronaut if he's black boy. And that black man will be afraid to protest that in the United States. And it doesn't matter how rich he is, you know, until relatively recently, he was still gonna have to enter through, you know, the kitchen, you know, the back door, the servant's entrance, the staff entrance, you know, that sort of thing. So what you're saying in Brazil is that class is as much of a, or class is more of a factor in the way people look at you and treat you than color. And that can insulate you, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the thing. I mean, that's a terrible reality. That's a terrible truth.
Now, as a foreigner, do you think that a wealthy or seemingly middle class, well-to-do, educated black foreigner is going to get it different than a well-to-do, educated black Brazilian? Like, are they going to say, oh, but you're still from here, so we're kind of going to treat you a little bit different?
Certainly, yes. And here's something I've encountered. There have been times when I'll go someplace and I'll walk into a building, let's say one of my clients says, why I can't meet you at our normal place to have coffee. I still need you to help me with this project we're working on that I hired you for. Come by my office. Sure, no problem. And I walk in and I just start to play a game where I'll send a message up and I'll say, hey, I'm in the lobby. And he'll say, great, I'm going to come down, pick you up from the lobby. We'll go grab sandwiches across the street and come back to my office. And I'll just stand there. And you would be amazed because first they look at you. And then they try and figure out, okay, who are you here to see? And they look at me and they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? Because they're not sure about me yet. And it's interesting to look at the way they look at me before. And then when the person who works in the office or the owner of the company comes down and says, hey, good morning. And I say, hey, good morning. And they start freaking out. Because they realized they treated me with disdain thinking I was a black Brazilian. But the reason they treated me with disdain was because had I been a black Brazilian, there is a deep-seated anger at thinking, how dare you be a black Brazilian man whose position in society allows him to come to this office. But if you're a foreigner, you're not from here, so you're not a threat to the hierarchy.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking. It's like African diplomats during the Civil Rights Movement. They weren't in like the UN headquarters in New York City going to a different bathroom, right? And so they're kind of like, look, you obviously, some of those diplomats were saying like, look, you've obviously figured it out when we can all use the same bathroom here. So how is it that the other people who are just like me in the rest of the country somehow need a different rule? And it's kind of like, you're gonna leave in a few days. So you're not actually a part of this system. So an exemption to the rule, basically exemptions reinforce the rule because you're only an exemption. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember, I live in the Arab world and I speak Arabic quite well. So sometimes when I meet people, it's not my habit to speak to someone in my language if I'm in their country, right?
Smart.
So if I just bump into some stranger and we're both, if we're both waiting for coffee or wherever we might be, you know, waiting in line at the grocery store, I'll start the conversation off in Arabic. Now, what I've noticed is that at a certain point, they'll ask where I'm from. When I say America, they may not notice it, but there have been multiple occasions where I've literally seen their face change to kind of just talking like, okay, let's just chit chat and, you know, once I check out, I'll leave, to, oh, wow. I mean, their face opens up and brightens up and they want my number and all this type of stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start telling these people I'm from Sudan and see what happens then. I mean,
Now, here's my
you know what I
question.
mean? So there's this idea.
Is that a function of your Americanness or your Black Americanness? Because you got to remember, there are places where being Black is simply everybody's Black, but being an American, or somebody who's just not from there, they go, oh, because I have friends from Jamaica. People go, oh my goodness, you're from Jamaica, and it's the same thing because nobody hates Jamaicans. Like, you can't find anybody on this planet who doesn't go, wow, Jamaicans.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, that's true because African American, there's that swagger, like, the music that a lot of people listen to, like hip hop is global. Even the local hip hop artists are kind of like imitating or looking up to African American artists, right? And then, when they want to watch sports and stuff like that. So we do have a kind of, in a way, we do have a very positive image overseas, right? In the sense of being cool. Now, there's some negative stereotypes mixed in, but overall, they expect you to be cool. So they're so glad, you know what I mean, that like they met you and stuff. And I'm gonna tell you a story. Ethiopians, a lot of Ethiopians look just like African Americans. Like when I was in Australia, there was a huge Northeast African community. And a lot of them look, I was like, I didn't even know where this dude was from until he told me. I would have honestly thought he looked like a dude from my high school, right? Something like that. Like even you, I'm sure I've met Ethiopian people who look like you, and I'd be confused if I saw you and you told me you were from Ethiopia. I was like, wow. It could happen. So anyways, I remember we were at a party and there was a good looking guy, a very handsome guy, right? One of my friends. He was dancing with like one of the most beautiful girls the whole night. And then all of a sudden he came to me all mad. I was like, yo, what happened? He's like, man, we were dancing and then at some point she asked me where I was from. I said, Ethiopia. She just went, I thought you were American, and kind of like, I'm done. This whole time I was, can you imagine? I mean, so some of it is specifically that you're American and not only that you're not a part of their system. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I see that.
Now, back to the situation in Brazil. Without really wanting to intentionally paint a negative tint to how things have gone, you do enjoy some advantages based on the fact that you're educated. Personally, you are confident and well-spoken, and also that you're American. Now, are there any things that you still feel like you face that are negative despite these advantages that you have? Meaning, at the end of the day, there's still some places you shouldn't go. There's still some people who are going to be like that. I mean, and this is something that I think a lot of Black people legitimately want to know when they think about a place. Is it safe? I mean, is there anything that you shouldn't do?
Let's back up for a second. You said a couple of things I wanna address. You said you're educated. First, yes, that, by the way, formal education is the keys to the kingdom. It doesn't matter where you're from, what color you are, how rich or how poor you are. If you get an education, you win almost all the time. There's been this huge anti-education sentiment, and I'm thinking, even if it were true that most people can get by with something other than education, if you're Black, you're not one of those people. Two, you said well-spoken. Unpack that for me.
Okay. What I mean is that, like most people, when you leave your country, you don't use a regional accent. I don't speak with the Texas twang or drawl, for example, even though I basically have one. When I speak, it's the kind of newscaster, academic sort of accent. And I feel that basically you have the same thing where you don't have a regional accent. I don't know if you used one at home before or not, but a person of any race in the US who has a Southern accent is kind of seen as being uneducated. I know very rich people, white people from Georgia, who are paying to get accent removal classes. So I'm just referring to that.
I've worked with people in that situation. I have a cousin who's a PhD who wrote something that got noticed by a university that asked him to come and speak to a class. When they called him to confirm the dates and they heard his deep South accent, they balked.
Yeah, so that's what I mean is that, okay, let me explain that another way. You have the accent that people want to learn. And what I mean by that is that you could be, there's different kinds of English, but when someone says they want to learn English, they want to learn the American or the British accent, meaning the newscaster, the BBC Oxford accent, the Oxbridge accent from England, or the so-called Midwest accent of the United States. And they don't want to have a teacher who could be a great teacher and even a naturalized citizen, but they have some kind of a foreign accent or a regional accent. So that's what I mean by well-spoken. When people, whether they're in Brazil or not, hear you speak English, that's the kind of English they want to hear. You know what I'm saying? So back to my question, being a well-spoken person, being an educated and personally confident person will, like you said, give you a pass in a lot of situations and contexts. But what I'm wondering is there is there still a sort of code being a Black person in Brazil? Like, for example, Black parents have the talk with their children about what to do if police pull you over, regardless of how wealthy or well-spoken they may be, regardless of what kind of car they may be driving, they're going to say, there's certain things you need to watch out for. There's certain things that you need to make sure that you do, certain places, whatever it may be. Do you feel that there are those limits or advices, et cetera, in Brazil?
Well, I'll tell you how they manifest. Any place where I would go and I would be in danger is a place where anybody would be in danger regardless of who they are. Again, I want to stress, in order for me in Sao Paulo, Brazil, to be in danger, I would have to go someplace I should not be, with people I shouldn't be with, doing something that shouldn't be done. I'm not going to accidentally fall into a dangerous situation. As far as being an American, yeah, there's always going to be someone that is resentful of the fact that whether you like it or not, there is going to be, for example, your friend may carry a resentment towards Americans after having a woman stop dancing with him and walk away when she found out he was not American.
Yeah.
Now, I have found that there are people, and this has happened in every country I've been to, there are people who may have spent time in the United States who lie to their own countrymen and say, I'm an American. And no one's going to know any different until they run into an American. And I've seen guys shit themselves when they realize when his girlfriend or his buddies say, hey, let's all go out for pizza. I'm going to invite a new friend of mine I met at the gym in jiu-jitsu. Oh, yeah, we'll all go out for pizza. And then when I show up, they go, holy shit, he's from America. And as soon as I start talking, he'll realize I'm not really from there. Now, me personally, I'm not going to out anybody. I'm not here to play Mr. Righteous with anybody. If you're lying to people, it'll catch up with you eventually. But it breaks my heart to know that they feel like they're in a position socially and professionally that they have to use the time they were in America to, as best they can, change their accent and as best they can change their vernacular.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll answer the same question for myself. What I think African Americans need to realize is that the police and random racial violence that you see in the United States basically doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, right? You see what I mean? Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, I've been to Australia. Okay, it's similar to the United States in that they speak English. They're a former English colony. Yes, they have their racism, but there's really no violence. Okay, so you might deal with...
Got to disagree with you as somebody who lived in Sydney, Australia. Maybe the situation was different. The violence against Aborigines, who are Black people.
Okay. No. What I was referring to is towards people of African descent. No, in Australia, definitely Aborigines are in a different situation. Generally, most countries are not as violent as the United States. I mean, the statistics of gun deaths per year.
Okay,
Uh,
gun deaths, but you said violence. The things that happen to the Aborigines are at least as bad as what happens to Americans, American blacks. They have been systematically rooted and raped out of existence.
right, right. No. I totally agree. But what I was referring specifically to, the United States. I'm sorry, I was just referring specifically to the situation about Africans. But yes, what happens is every country may have its pet group that it sort of discriminates against or wants to keep down. Let me give you an example of what I was trying to say, and I did kind of misspeak about Australia. There is anti-Black racism in Saudi Arabia and in the Arab world in general. They, after centuries of a kind of white slave trade based in the Caucasus and Eastern Europe, shifted about the same time as America to a slave trade out of Africa. So that was their most recent source of slavery before they abolished it, like most other countries have. So they do say racist things. And you will see online racism, horrible online racism, coming from Arab countries. Now, it's not everyone, but you don't hear about violence, meaning you could hear a racist comment in a store. You could see some stuff online. You may hear people having certain racial slurs that they want to use, but you don't hear about people getting lynched historically until today. You don't hear about people getting shot. You don't find out about, you know what I'm saying, racist mobs or those types of things that you do see in the United States. So in that sense, what I feel that a lot of African Americans or even Americans should realize is that most countries aren't really that violent. Most countries just aren't that violent. Now, I'm just sharing a screen. If you look at the bottom, the red line, which represents gun-related homicide in the United States, is far surpassing any of the other countries on the list. And these are high-income countries. But I think that if I found something for all countries in the world, it might be a little bit more difficult to display. And the general point that you get is obviously there's a lot more violence outside the US. There's a lot more violence inside the US than out. So what that means in my analysis is that the racism that you see does still exist. Anti-Black racism still does exist in all the places that I've been, but it doesn't go hand in hand with violence the way it does in the United States. And I think that it's hard to separate the two in the US because they've always gone hand in hand. But in other parts of the world, they're just simply less violent. They're not necessarily less racist. They're just overall less violent. I mean, that's been my observation in the places I've been. I mean, I haven't been everywhere. You know what I mean?
No, that's a very fair statement. Very fair statement.
Okay. Yeah. Now, where have you been? Where else have you been? We've both been to Australia. I haven't been to Brazil. What countries? Huh?
Oh, you know what? Before we do anything, I want to show you something that I did. I want to share with you before we move on to the where have we been part. Hold on. No, that's not it. Hold on. Nope, that's not it.
Okay.
Hold on. Looking for a tab that I there. Pop that up. I actually did 10 minute. I did a 10-minute chat on that for anybody who wants to go listen to it. Brazil, Violence and Danger, Where You Are. And that kind of gives some of my my opinions and thoughts on it, a little bit more concisely, and I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Okay.
Now, going back to where have I been? Before here, I was living in Shanghai, China. And by the way, we forgot to say hello to the people in the chat. I forgot to say hello. It's like, hey, DC Tony, and thanks for showing up. I appreciate it. Everybody appreciates it.
Yeah. I sent you a shout out, shout out DC Tony. Hope you're still here, man. Thanks for joining the conversation. Thanks for commenting.
Yeah. I was in Shanghai, China. Okay. Before that, I was in the United States and Las Vegas for a while. Then before that, I was in, let's say, was it Japan for a couple of years? Then China, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, London, a couple of years in each place. I've lived in about 15 countries.
Wow. Now, hey, let's talk about Japan, because this is something I've heard that is really interesting. Are you still there? Okay, well, I think Yusuf may have accidentally got disconnected, but since we were just mentioning Japan, okay, he's back. Hey, you're back. Okay. No, I haven't been to Japan, but I'm going to mention to you a couple of anecdotes from colleagues of mine that have, and just kind of bounce them off you for your reflections. What I've heard about Japan, and this is actually mostly from white people, British or Canadian, is that it's not even about race. It's actually about whether it's like you're Japanese or you're anybody else. Japanese, non-Japanese. And my friend, good looking, 6 foot tall, blue eyes, and he's like, I would be at a bar and they would just come up to me and say, oh, excuse me, the bar is closing. And he's like, you're not kicking anyone else out. But he could speak a little Japanese, and basically some Japanese was like, what's this foreigner doing in my face? Like, he didn't own the bar, but he's just like, I don't want to sit here with the foreigner. You know what I mean? And another guy basically was like the same things. Like, it's not even, it's just, you're not Japanese, and it may or may not, most likely it won't be violence, but it's like a hotel may have a sign, no non-Japanese allowed. And it's not even about race. It's just, you could be white and they kind of have a fetish, but you're still a foreigner. So that's kind of like a xenophobia as opposed to a racism. What was your observation or experience with that?
No, that's exactly correct. In Japan, they have places where foreigners are allowed and places where foreigners are not allowed. But what ends up happening is this is really when white American and white European travelers get exposed to what it's like to be in a place where being white doesn't matter.
Wow. That must hurt.
I have seen white Europeans get the ever-living crap beaten out of them because they simply refuse to understand when somebody says, you need to leave now, that means you need to leave.
And they can't pull the white card, basically.
And they can't, and they literally cannot process it. They literally cannot process what is happening.
Because no matter where they go in the world, there's only a few countries, and I think it's probably Japan and South Korea, where they don't care where you are if you're not a local or a citizen. And the citizenship is the race. Like,
that's the thing. And they don't understand, this is the weird part. A lot of my friends who are white will see me in a country like Thailand and they'll say, hey, Watt, I heard you've got a contract with this company and they're going to go through you now. And I'll say, yeah. I met with the president the other day and the financial guy, and we worked out some numbers. And they'll lean in really close and say, but I heard they don't like black people in this country, because they're trying to process how I got this done. And then I look at them and I say, they don't like white people either, so we're in the same boat.
So
For the very first time, they have to come to the realization that they're competing against someone for whom their race hasn't been an advantage in their life. Now they're really going, holy shit, you mean this black guy just outworked me and had a better quality of service to his clients than I did?
Yeah, there's no hookup. There's no like you walk into the bank and they tell you something that they're not going to tell the other people and that sort of thing. I mean, and see, now going back to like where we really started, a lot of black people want to know what to expect in this country or that country. And I totally understand because see, they may have met people from these parts of the world in the United States. And those people are kind of like, you know, this apocryphal story where the first word every immigrant learns is the N word. So they're participating in American racism as, you know, maybe they're in the middle somewhere where, you know, they don't want to be like you, they want to be like them. And so they might assume that, hey, well, I guess if someone from that place is having the same attitude as they are in the US, then I guess over there where they're from, it's going to be the same thing. And, you know, I really think that it's eye-opening to realize that you actually have options where you can write your own ticket in a lot of other places. And a lot of the things that you're going to have to worry about in the United States, you're only going to have to worry about in the United States, especially in my observation, as it pertains to violence. Now, I'm not saying it won't happen anywhere. I'm not really sure how eager I am to go to Eastern Europe and the Baltic countries, right? But you got to remember, they hate everybody. I mean, it's like they hate the people who look exactly like them because they have a slightly different accent. Like, you know, Bosnians and Serbians almost have the exact same language. They can barely tell each other apart and they're like killing each other. So it's kind of like, it's not, again, directed against black people in particular. It's more against the other, and you may be a little bit more other. But either way, it's not going to be something where you got to be afraid at night of what's going to happen to you, you know?
And what do you do there? I mean, how do you deal with trying to get that message out? When people say, what will I be, you know, what will it be like living there? It's just kind of like you just get to be a regular person. You can go with the baggage you bring. If you don't bring any, odds are you'll be fine.
Yeah, I totally noticed that when I was living in Pakistan. Just for the audience, I actually lived in Pakistan for, I think it was 3 years. I just moved to Oman where I am now. And basically people just kind of, you could go somewhere and say, hey, you know, I want to make a deal with you. I want to make a contract. I want to provide this service. I want to charge this much. And I felt like everyone was just looking at me based on what I brought to the table. How are my forms? How well did it seem that I can do what I was proposing to do? And yes, maybe I can guess that someone of a different color may have gotten something different or better, but I felt like people really didn't care what I looked like. They may have been happy that I was American. They may not have even cared about that. They may have just said, hey, look, I run a business. I want to get things done. Can you do it? You know what I mean? Now, Franciel Aguiar just said that in Japanese, Korean, and Chinese are racist towards Southeast Asian people. And I know of Southeast Asians who have mentioned that to me. My question to Franciel, and I'm going to ask you now, Yusef, is based on your experiences in East Asia, do you think that some of the xenophobia of East Asians versus Southeast Asians is related to skin color, or is it just simply a regional and national thing?
Skin color. It's always associated. You know, you got to remember the trade of slavery in modern history transcends the world. I mean, that entire concept of who worked out in the field and who got to work in the house. Oh, by the way, I don't know if, because I think this is our first time doing this. If you click in live comment on someone's name there, you can display it across the front.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I just put show. I click show.
Boom. There you go. And so,
Okay. So let. Okay, I'm showing Francielle's comment so you can see that.
yeah, and then you can do that with any comment. But
Okay. Okay. Cool.
it's one of those situations where it really is a big deal. Now, even in Southeast Asian countries, I remember seeing commercials where the bad guy or the idiot was always the darkest of their race. So the darkest Thai person was always cast as the stupid person or the idiot or the criminal. You know, now that's something that you see, and it's fought against. But the advantage that Black Americans have is that there are enough of us. We're not the same race, so to speak. If we can argue race as a concept, I don't know how you want to handle that. But as a Black American, we know we're separate, so we were able to band together. That was the advantage that Black Americans had. It was the one drop rule. You were either white or you were not. So all the Black people were simply put in one box together, and in that box we propagated. DC Tony said, explain the skin color titles in Brazil. That's something Francine may be able to go into. I don't know.
Francine is your wife, right?
No. But here's the thing. Francine may be able to explain it to you. I don't know. My whole thing is, here's where we are. I know that here they had so many different levels of separation that allowed them to individually discriminate by saying, if you're a shade or two higher or lower than someone else, we'll give you more or less opportunity. In America, you were Black together. That's it.
Right. I think the only exception in the American experience may have been in New Orleans before the Civil War, when people from all over the United States came to New Orleans. They kind of have this insulated, culture where there were three groups. There were whites, there were free persons of color, or what do you call it? For some reason, I can't remember the name. And then there were like Blacks, like Africans, non-mixed. So people who were visibly mixed race basically were living separately from Africans, but also separate African Americans, but also separately from whites. Creole, they were called Creole. Now, what I think in the US, there's this concept of a one drop rule, where basically if you have any visible African ancestry, meaning if you look like you got some Black in you, you're Black. So you have someone like Lena Horne, who would not be considered Black in most of the places that I've been, right? Now you see my skin color, I've been told that I'm not Black, meaning that word doesn't apply to you because most places in the world don't have a one drop rule. So they have all these different stratifications, and it's like, there's just as many social strata to go with them. So there's not one glass ceiling. There's like 100 different glass ceilings, and your glass ceiling comes with.
I have a client who had a really casual conversation with me, and he said something about Black people, and I said, well, what about us? And he said, well, no, you're not Black. I said, no, yes, I am. He goes, well, not really. I'm like, yeah, I am. And it was hard for him to get his head around the fact that I'm Black, because I'm educated and I travel and I have a great career, and all of those small things, in his opinion, factored into the formula of whether or not I was Black.
Yeah. So there are a lot of African American people who look just like, light-skinned African Americans. We might call them mixed. We would still say they were Black, but we would say they're mixed, right? They would never, ever be considered Black in a lot of other countries, meaning there's plenty of Arabs who are not the Afro-Arabs, so to speak, and they're light-skinned Arabs, and they look just like who we would call African Americans. Like, I don't know why I keep thinking of this example, but like Lena Horne, right? she would be considered a white Arab in a lot of countries. And if she said the word black about herself, we would be like, no, what are you talking about? You know, because it's like we have a different scheme, or I don't know, a system, so to speak. Now in Brazil, you said that you don't know all the terms in a way to break them down, but does it basically go that these different terms for skin color and ancestry correspond with a Brazilian person's chances in life, so to speak? Meaning, we don't expect someone like you to be in university, but we do expect someone like you to be in university or in a company or that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Wow. So is it something where you go certain places and you don't even see, you don't expect to see people beyond a certain line in the
Yes.
country club or in the company, in this mall, as opposed to that mall?
Yes. They have elevators for, in any commercial building, they have elevators for guests and people who live there, and a separate elevator for workers, staff, and movers and stuff. You'd be amazed at how they'll look at you and they'll try to decide real quick, do I tell you to go use the staff elevator? Now, one of the things we have to talk about is, for better or for worse, Americans have a reputation for stirring shit up. And so they understand that if they get this wrong with a black American, we're not just going to walk away. I'm writing a letter to your company. I'm sending emails to your HR department. I'm going to find out who you are, who your man. They're all getting that email and mail to you. And it's just never going to be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I think one difference between the dark-skinned people in America, the African Americans, and dark-skinned people in other countries, whether they're Africans or not, is that we've been very resistant in a way. And we are world famous, as you say, for this movements that we've had. Whereas in some countries, like in Tunisia, there hasn't really been a civil rights movement led by Afro-Tunisians. I mean, not to the extent and the scope that it was in the United States. There have been a few protests and a few marches, but not something sustained. We're going to shut the whole country and cities down. We're going to burn this place down, sort of thing. So one thing is, I think people will try stuff with me. I'm not necessarily going to put them on blast, but I'm just going to keep talking to you like I respect myself. And even if you're disrespecting me, I'm not going to take my seat. When a person comes to me with this attitude of putting me in my place, it's up to me to recognize that place as being mine or not. If I act like that place is mine and I put myself in it, then I'm there. But what if I don't? You know what? They don't know what to do. And I don't know, yes, I may be getting away with something because of my American privilege. But I also think that, hey, I don't have the American privilege when I'm in America. I transferred from an elite private school that I went to a middle school to a public high school, which was, a normal level, right? A normal level, just a normal public school. So the counselor there was telling me and my parents, no, you shouldn't try to sign up for all these honors classes because, actually, you're transferring from a different school and you're also starting high school at the same time. All that social adjustment might make this academic load too much. And my mom was like, no. I think my dad wasn't even there. I think he was probably at work. But my mom, I'm sure she was there. And she was like, no, put him in those classes. No, I can't prove it, but I wonder, was she telling me that because I was black? I don't know. But regardless, there was a place she was trying to put me in. We refused to accept it. That no, we don't accept that as being our place. So that gave me the attitude, no matter where I go, of whether it's for racial reasons or not, or whether I don't even know the reason, I'm not going to accept less than what I came for or less than what my standards are.
Now, here's the thing. One of the things we can never forget is that we have so much bloodshed and kind of flaccid legislation that gave us the power to resist. We also can't forget how many of us were fed into the meat grinder before even one of us could cross. I mean, they tried to murder little girls who wanted to integrate into a regular school. They blew up children. They murdered, lynched, castrated. So we can't forget, it's not a matter of us just saying, this is what I will not tolerate. We always have to remember how many of us are willing to line up and die knowingly in order to do that. You got to find that in other countries too. What I was going to show you is, and I'll share this with you. I'll give you a similar story.
Okay.
When I was in university, one of the things that I would do to travel the world was find different government and school programs. So if you share that, I have this story called the Hawaii Hustle. When I was in university, I found the National Student Exchange office and I said, listen, where can I go? And they had a board with all the universities in America. And I saw Hawaii and I said, I want to go to Hawaii. The lady looked at me and she said, it's a nice place. It's great. However, it's very competitive. Everybody wants to go to Hawaii. And I said, yes, so do I. And she kind of gave me this pat on the head look and said, well, why don't we apply for a few other schools so that if it doesn't come through, you're not so disappointed. And I said, no, I'm going to apply to Hawaii. And what she didn't know is that she had no idea who I am. So what I did is I sat down, I went on the university website, and I found everyone associated with that program. And that's why I called it the Hawaii Hustle. I found everybody associated with that program. And I wrote them individual letters talking about how awesome they were, how I'd read that they did this in their department, that in their department, and what could they do to help me become someone who got accepted into the exchange program. And they wrote me letters back saying, we appreciate it, but we can't give you any special treatment just because you asked. Now, I already won the game. Let me repeat. I already won the game. Because you can't unknow the name Yusef Wateef and that he was one of those students who had the forethought and foresight to actually contact you. You can't not realize that when you see my name, I was one of those few that had the initiative to do more than just stamp out and fill in a standard piece of paper. Of course I was accepted.
Right.
It's hilarious because I'll never forget the look on her face when she came in with the letter and said, read that and tell me what they said. And I said, oh, I was accepted. And I swear I could hear her kind of peeing herself a little bit because she had no idea. She couldn't get her hair around it.
Well, that's the thing. It's kind of like people, they only got one move on the court. They try that move and it doesn't work. They don't have any other move to try. Right. So when they try to they're used to people reacting to the cues. Snap your fingers, whatever it is, and you jump in your place. When you don't do that, they're actually just going to let you do whatever you want. And so, again, it could be part of it that they just respect the game, meaning, wow, like this person. At the end of the day, sometimes people just want to get their stuff done, even if they still have their prejudices. They're like, all right, maybe I won't have this guy to dinner, but I guess I will give him the job. Or I guess I will let him through. Or I guess I won't say anything about the elevator because seems like he knows what he's doing. Seems like she's good at what she's doing, right?
Or he's going to create a problem.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that too. But I mean, I have had to actually put people in their place who are trying to put me in mine, because one thing that I'm sure you must have encountered is when you're not white, a lot of people around the world don't believe you're really American. They may not believe you're American at all. So, especially like in Arab countries, I don't know. I mean, they watch music all the time. They're obsessed with Will Smith. But when they meet someone who's black and they say they're American, they're like, huh? It's like,
I will fight you on that. They know that there are Black Americans. They know there are tons of Black Americans. They just don't believe you have the economic power or education to leave the country.
okay. So I remember one time a guy was trying to tell me who I was. I was waiting in line somewhere. This is actually in Saudi Arabia. And like I said, I could speak Arabic. So somehow, I don't even know how, this guy was just asking me where I was from. So I said, I'm from America. And he said, well, and this is what they always say in Arab countries, where's your dad from? Like, where are your parents from? Meaning, yeah, we understand that, like, just like we migrate to your country and call ourselves American, but we're really where we're from. That's what you did. He said, like, my dad's from America too. And then he was basically like, this whole conversation happened in Arabic. He was like, well, you're African, you're African. No, I mean, I am proudly African, but what he was trying to do was like say that I am not good enough to be an American. So I kind of was just like talking back to this guy. I said, look, I said, you're an Arab, right? He said, yes. I said, where are the Arabs originally from? He said, Yemen. I said, okay. So will I call you Yemeni just because your ancestors are from Yemen? Or will I call you Saudi because you've been living in Saudi? And he just kind of paused. And he recognized the truth. You can see it in his face. But then he was like, no, anti-Afriki, like, you're African, you're African. So I yelled back. I mean, it was ridiculous, but I was like, anti-Yemeni. And his friend tapped him on the shoulder and said, he's right. Like, shut up, he's right. Like, based on your logic, we're all going to call each other Yemeni. And no Arab is going to do that. I mean, they have their own prejudices and their own hierarchy and whatnot. So anyways, man, that was really what I really wanted to ask you to join to talk about, was the dynamics of being a person of African descent in Brazil, how that pertains to the way you'll be treated, and especially whether you can expect to believe what is portrayed in the media about how Blacks are treated in Brazil and the violence they receive. Just to recap, you basically made the point that there are places where that can happen, where you can be targeted for being Black, but that has to do, there's a strong class element in that that doesn't really apply in the United States. I mean, am I putting words in your mouth, or is that kind of what you meant?
That's fair.
Okay. So the way I want to end this, and I am going to end this now, is by encouraging everybody, and especially African Americans, to go see the world, right? Whether you've heard something about a place and it's supposed to be bad there, or whether it's not. I mean, pay attention to travel advisories, but there's nothing that you can't do. There's nowhere that you can't go. There's nothing that can stop you, not even racism. Even if there is racism in a place, it can't stop you. Last but not least, there are Black people everywhere. So why shouldn't you be one of them? You know what I'm saying? That's my final thought. There's Black people everywhere. Why shouldn't you be one of them? And if there's no Black people there, why not be the first? You know what I'm saying? Now, what were you going to say?
Forgot to do? You forgot to share this too. Put that on the screen. Tell them about our first big conversation.
Okay, right. Okay, well, yeah. That's actually the first time that we broadcast online, and that was about. Well, I was taking refuge in Pakistan at the time. Now, most people think of Pakistan based on the media as being an extremely violent country, bombs going off all over the place. It definitely has its problems, but it's kind of like in the U.S. What you hear about of a gang war shootout in one city has nothing to do with where you are, even if you're in another part of the same city. Most importantly, I found that regardless of what you saw in the media, Pakistan for me was infinitely safer than the United States. And living in that country, doing the opposite. I was in Pakistan looking at reports of violence in the US against African Americans, instead of someone in the US looking at reports in Pakistan. I said, oh my God, I felt so safe there. You know what I mean? And There weren't that many, but believe it or not, there's an African population there of both immigrants and a long-standing native sort of, Afro-Pakistani population. So that's something that I want to encourage, African Americans to do, not only as a lifestyle choice, but actually as an escape from a lot of the things that you may face in the United States. So I hope that people that are watching this broadcast are people that I might meet one day where I am, or that Yusef might meet those people where he is, or that we all might meet up somewhere together, man. So yeah, thank you, Yusef, for joining. If you don't have anything else to add, man, I think we might as well head our separate ways for now. Anything, any final thoughts to share?
I said when you click stop stream, don't click away. We can still chat for a second.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Okay, thank you everybody for tuning in. I'll see y'all later.